Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the third webinar in FERMA's webinar series on AI. This webinar is called Meet the Experts because today you will have the opportunity to ask all the questions that you may have to our experts present today. So it will offer you, the audience, the chance to really be active and interactive. I'm Tiffen, the CEO of FERMA, and I will be moderating this Q&A today. And we've got four great speakers with us. Dan Adamson. Dan is a technology entrepreneur and executive with a demonstrated history of inventing, growing teams, releasing products with a focus on R&D and innovation. He's passionate for AI, search, and all things digital. Josh Gerhardin is co-founder and CEO of Yields.io. He's an experienced machine learning and statistic model developer and passionate about algorithm monitoring, testing, and validation. Nicholas Robert is an emerging risk modeler at Lloyd's. He's passionate about mathematics, machine learning, insurance, and engineering robust solutions to real-world problems. And finally, James Hargreave is an industry practice lead at Moody's Analytics, where he is responsible for developing their value proposition for company data across the insurance market in Europe and Africa. With 8 years of experience helping financial and corporate sector clients transform their use of global entity data to make better, more efficient decisions, James brings extensive expertise in leveraging data analytics for strategic insights. But before we start, we are delighted to say that we have a surprise, I would say, at the beginning of today's webinar. As you might know already, between our second webinar, which took place in April, and now, the EU ministers approved the EU AI Act on the 21st of May. The Act is set to enter into force in August, and as a publication in the EU official journal is only expected for the second half of July, we have been able to pre-record an interview with Kay Zenner, who is the head office and digital policy advisor to the member of the European Parliament, Axel Voss. MEP Voss played a very pivotal role in the Parliament's negotiations during the trilogue. FERMA recorded this interview early this week. We will now play the interview. With Kai.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
You're welcome to being with Kai. So we wanted to ask you to put the EU AI Act into context for our audience. So we know that, the EU over the past 5 years has been extremely active in putting forward a lot of digital related policies. So for you, where does the EU AI Act fit?
Yes, so indeed, the European Union has been extremely active. There is the Digital Services Act, Digital Market Act, Cyber Resilience Act, and so on, and so on, and so on. And the AI Act is just one of many new laws that are entering into force. It's also not really complementary with all those other laws because there are at least potentially a lot of overlaps, sometimes even contradictions. If we are talking about the Platform Work Directive, another new law about the Digital Services Act, both of them have certain areas where it's not so clear what is lex specialis and what not when we are comparing it with the AI Act. But on top of that, there are also a lot of existing pieces of legislation, like the GDPR, most of all, but also sectorial legislation from the health sector, from the finance sector, where it's not so clear, again, how the AI Act and those new obligations in the AI Act are now fitting in. in general, the idea behind the AI Act was really to give the developers, but also the deployers of artificial intelligence technologies a safe legal framework that allows them to invest heavily in artificial intelligence by knowing that if they are following those kind of minimum standards, that then they are compliant with European rules. And basically also, this was the ambition, maybe trigger another Brussels effect, meaning that the EU rules would be copy-pasted to other parts of the world, which would then, of course, help European companies to also export their systems. But going back to my first point, the next months and years will show if this ambition is really something realistic and if we will be successful, because of all those overlaps and contradictions that at the moment make a big or put a big question mark over the AI Act.
Mm-hmm. And Kai, you've been really at the front row together with your MEP, negotiating with the Council, but also the Commission. So could you tell us what you pushed to have in the EU AI Act and maybe what you wanted to avoid as well? And finally, are you pleased with the end result and why?
Yeah, so Axel and I from the beginning had the ambition to create a new type of digital law that is not like the GDPR, already outdated once it's entering into force, an AI Act that is also cooperative, meaning that it's constantly including stakeholders also to help that it's always up to date and that new developments are being considered. And also as a third point, to try out new, let's say, legislative tools or mechanisms. So really have the AI Act as a kind of blueprint and based on the learnings that we are making with the AI Act to have things that we can also use for and other digital laws that are coming in the future. This was our ambition. To a certain extent, we manage that. The AI Act is indeed principle-based. It's very cooperative. Stakeholders are at least potentially heavily involved. Our big problem with the AI Act is that there was such a big political push at the very end to conclude the political negotiations as soon as possible in order to present the AI Act to the citizens in front of the European election, that we didn't spend enough time, in our opinion, to make sure that everyone understands what we want to say in the AI Act. And the end result is that the AI Act is extremely vague, that it's potentially creating a lot of legal uncertainty from now. I talked already about the legal overlaps and contradictions, but on top of that, if you just read the legal text, you have a lot of paragraphs and articles where even I'm, as a lawyer, I'm not able to really say, okay, it's definitely this obligation and you fulfill it in that and that and that way. So right now, I think it's not really feasible to become compliant as a company or as another actor. And a lot will depend on technical standards and on secondary legislation to further specify what is meant by it.
And as you will know, our audience are risk managers, and they will have all seen the risk management philosophy behind the EU AI Act. So what can you tell us about the motivation of having such a risk-based approach to the legislation?
Yes, so the European Commission, and this was already one decision of the Commission where they were going against the European Parliament, because we as Parliament had an approach in mind that, similar to the US system, we have general principles, and those general principles will be complemented by sectorial legislation. In the sectorial legislation, risk management would, of course, also played a big role. But the Commission, by taking a horizontal approach and has as a baseline principle a product safety approach, risk management is basically from the beginning at the core of the whole AI Act, because as you know, every product safety legislation piece, like the medical device regulation, like radio equipment directive, and so on, they are always based on a long risk assessment, on a quality management system, and so on, that the provider, the developer of an AI system, needs to go through and basically check every element that could harm health and safety. The issue with the AI Act is that while what I just said is kind of established and risk managers from your organizations know how to do it, the AI Act makes it much more complicated by including fundamental rights protection in the scope of the AI Act, which now needs to be considered in the quality management system, in the risk assessment, and so on. And these established procedures don't really answer to the question how to do it. So also here, we talked already about a lot of question marks. Also here is a huge question mark, even for people that are very, very experienced with doing risk assessments.
And so what you could tell us about the biggest risk or the biggest opportunity around AI for companies and
Yes, so I would say the biggest opportunity is actually to use the legal uncertainty as an advantage. Because as you know, we had a lot of similar occasions, also like the GDPR, where we saw that those companies that were engaging very early, very much at the beginning, that they created a first mover advantage. And if even the public authorities don't really know how to interpret the AI Act, it allows those first mover actors to maybe establish already best practices, to maybe create a group of companies, a group of organizations that find a really good way, for example, to do a quality management system, maybe transferring an already established mechanism from, let's say, the health sector to the whole field of AI. And by presenting it to the Commission, let's say, using a little bit the situation that the Commission is completely overwhelmed with a lot of tasks to fulfill, a lot of secondary legislation to write, so that very likely the Commission in those situations will react very positively, kind of relieved, because they have some things they can take over, maybe adjust a little bit, but otherwise they know already that it's working for the industry. This, I would say, is the biggest opportunity right now. The biggest risk is, I think, due to the fact that AI is a highly dynamic sector, AI systems are evolving by nature. Again, we don't really know if the AI Act conceptually is the right way to regulate it. Maybe we will find out that legally it was a wrong move. This on the one hand. The second biggest risk is that what we see now with foundation models, Gen AI is standing for a big technical transition period. And with every transition period, there are a lot of uncertainties. So for companies right now to use a product like ChatGPT or Copilot and so on, of course, comes with risk, because we don't have a clear answer if you are compliant by using it, if you are not maybe violating GDPR rules, and so on and so on. In this transition period, probably companies either take a risk or wait until we have more clarity. Both things can have advantages or disadvantages.
for sure. And now turning to my final question. So looking at, the coming months, coming years. So what next in AI? So do you see as a focus, what is the focus do you see going forward? And how could risk managers, but also FERMA help in this area?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think I will kind of answer it by going back to what I just said. I think risk managers are actually right now the perfect actors to guide or to navigate companies through this period of uncertainty, because they saw it already 2 centuries ago with other technologies. They saw it in the last decades several times when there were those transitional or transformational shifts in certain fields. And probably they have already quite good proceedings, even though they were not written for AI, but nevertheless mechanisms that showed in the past that they are a good approach to deal or to go forward in such a situation. So I think it will definitely help to look in the past and to use this experience from then. Another point is, and this is basically now not only for risk managers, but for basically for everyone, is that I think we all need to heavily improve our AI literacy skills. In schools, the state needs to do it with lifelong learning, but especially also companies, because as I said, there are so many new things, and to say it simple, our eye is right now probably not really ready to discover, to detect every AI generated content or everything where AI is in. And here, especially risk managers, because they are advising, need to be really at the top, as they need to be able what others maybe cannot see yet.
Thank you for this recommendation, Kai, and thank you a lot for your time. And since your MEP Voss has been just re-elected for a new term, FERMA really look forward to continue to engaging, with you over the next 5 years.
Thank you very much. We as well.
So after this interview, let's now turn to the guest expert joining us today. And the first question to kick off the discussion while the participants are submitting their questions via the chat is I would say, an open-ended one. And I will ask it to all of the four of you. We would like to know, since the last webinar that we organized in April, with all that happened in Brussels on the EU Act, have you changed any aspects of your approach to and use of AI? And I will start with Nick.
Well, I don't think that the EU AI Act has had an enormous impact on the way that we're approaching AI here in the United Kingdom. But there's a lot of comparing and contrasting between the kind of very loose principles-based framework that we're seeing unfold here in the UK compared to the risk-based version of the EU. I think the largest question that we're asking ourselves now is whether or not our principles framework is adequate. Whether we're being too permissive and whether or not we're enabling companies to go off in ways that will later be discovered to be harmful. I personally think that the prescriptiveness of the EU is, while in some ways difficult to navigate for companies that are developing new solutions in this space, it in some way also frees them from the worry that they're going to be burdened later by horizontal constraints on their ability to use this technology if it turns out to be harmful.
Thank you, Nick. Dan.
Yeah, I think we're seeing a lot of clients and having a lot of conversations where folks are now, yes, the EUI Act is here. They understand that, and I'd say there's two sort of groups. There's folks that are looking to get ahead of things, and a very insightful interview earlier where you talk about early movers, adopters. Others who realize, everybody realizes that yes, we have time here. This isn't just you don't have to have a knee-jerk reaction. You can be thoughtful, and so we're starting to ask about how to get started on this journey and what steps to take. And I'm sure we'll talk more about that as we progress in this discussion here.
Thank you, Dan. And what about you, Joss? You're on mute, Josh. Yeah.
After 5 years of remote conferences, I still make the same mistake. So what I was saying is that what we see is very similar to what Dan just mentioned. Maybe specifically then towards AI teams, we see more interest in how to actually start modifying some of the engineering principles that teams use to get a bit closer to becoming compliant with say new regulation. EU AI Act is one of them. Of course, in the financial sector, there are other regulatory frameworks that also already are in place or will become active that also have an impact on how AI is being developed. But in that context, still, we do also see that there is quite a bit of awareness that need to be created, especially in organizations that perhaps didn't have to be regulated that stringently. And so I think in the next few months, we'll see quite a lot of initiatives in organizations to start skilling up the data science teams and bringing risk and data science a bit closer together.
Yeah, very interesting. And James, have you noticed any change?
I think from our side, it's good to see the sort of ethics-based nature of some of the points included in the Act, and I think what we really see is that it's always good to know the boundaries of the playground that you're within. So having some clarity around some of the expectations around this topic is good, because it gives you that ability to know in terms of what you're doing today, whether or not you're sort of playing within the rule book, and really how you can maximize opportunities following that guidelines.
Thank you, James. You might have seen that we have launched a poll among our audience, and we were asking the question: if you are a risk manager, are you using AI already in your work? And according to the results, 36% of the participants are already using AI, and 45% are considering using AI. The rest is 18%, I don't know. So my next questions linked to the result of this poll is, what do you think prevents risk managers from using AI? Who would like to take this one? Dan.
I think I can start. I think actually that's a positive, positive result. I've been speaking for a few years now about how risk management does need to use some of these tools. We know that a lot of these processes are manual and time consuming and potentially error prone. And for risk managers to start to incorporate some level of automation through to, and I classify a lot of these systems as decision assist systems that can help be more efficient, but humans making a final call, that's very positive. If we'd done this poll a year ago, it might have been, I've done similar polls where it might have been 10%. So there's the surge of hopefully responsible use of AI. But I think to your question around what's holding people back, I think the lack of certainty. So the EU AI Act does help with that. now there is some certainty. Where are the boundaries of what's a prohibited use, what's a high risk use, and what's not? These are guidelines that we can then use throughout the organization and use within risk management itself.
And I'm now taking questions from the audience, and it's related to what you've just said, Dan. So concretely, how do we make best use of AI in risk management?
I think from my perspective, it comes back to Dan's point around using any sort of AI tool as a co-pilot, right? That's why they're predominantly called co-pilots. I don't think for most use cases, people aren't recommending removing the human from the loop. The whole point is really to enable that person to use their specialized skill set to make final decisions and to use their experience to really maximize the value that they can provide to the business. A lot of people aren't necessarily hired to spend a lot of time on very manual tasks, trying to make sense of a lot of unstructured data. So if tools can be used to simplify that process, they can then focus on using their expertise and their background knowledge to actually make decisions as opposed to spending it on collecting and maintaining that data.
Yeah, I'd like to agree with that. I think what we're going to see is that a chat interface is not the final form of the interface to this technology. We're seeing a pretty aggressive pushes from Microsoft and other vendors such as Apple to basically integrate, predictive analytics, language models within the OSs, within the devices that we use. And ultimately, I think this will lead to a much more streamlined and kind of friction-free window or mechanism to get the productivity gains of these tools. It's not necessarily the case that we're going to start to see special fit for purpose tools with ChatGPT like interfaces for every single discipline. I think it'll more like just kind of seep into every aspect of the digital world.
And maybe to add one aspect, it feels like we're primarily talking about generative AI and co-pilot type of use cases. However, I mean, there is still the old school AI applications as well. And I think especially in risk management activities, there might be quite interesting applications there as well that I hope we will see to continue to evolve. As one example, if you think about risk, it's very important to try to understand what are good scenarios to investigate, because we don't know what the future holds. Generating interesting scenarios in a way doesn't require a chat interface within AI, a generative AI tool. You have other techniques as well that are sometimes also slightly easier to control when it comes to controlling the scope of the application itself. Therefore, I think they lend themselves quite nicely to important aspects such as decision making and risk management.
And
yeah,
please.
No, sorry, I'll just chime in. I think everybody, all the rage in the media is generative AI, and of course it's very powerful, and there are lots of use cases for it. But when we go into organizations and we do assessments on our side, for example, a lot of the applications that are being deployed now are what I would call classical AI. They aren't necessarily generative AI systems, and they're geared towards, either, being very predictive in a specific use case, and that's where a lot of folks are starting. If they're doing generative AI work, they might be starting with more internal use cases and the decision assist tools. So there's definitely, where there's what's portrayed externally in the media and all the rage, and for good reason, that's cool stuff. But then there's, if your question had been what AI in your poll, what types of AI are being deployed, it's a little different than what's being portrayed in the media.
Yes, for sure. And if we deep dive a little bit, there is a question about insurance aspects. So how can we begin to use AI to optimize insurance aspects? What should we start off with? For risk managers, who would like to take this one?
Sorry,
Maybe
is the question, say
it's
that again,
about,
and then
it's basically what, where can the risk managers start with AI if they want to optimize the insurance aspect?
I'll start on this. So what I've been saying is that you want to find tasks which are difficult to do, but easy to verify that they've been done. You can kind of imagine a spectrum here where you have tasks that are easy to do, or sorry, hard to do and hard to verify. These are the type that we tend to give people to do. Say like reviewing a legal briefing. In order to identify whether or not it's been reviewed and summarized correctly, you essentially have to do the whole task over again. Something that's hard to do but easy to verify might be like extracting data from a spreadsheet and summarizing it when you know that it has to have a fixed value of some kind at the end to sum up to. If you can find those kind of sweet spots in your value chain, then that's probably the best place to start looking. Tasks which require a sort of deferred verifiability because you won't know if they've been done correctly until the future, or you require a sort of a trust relationship with a human actor, are much more difficult to automate using AI at this time.
And should the risk manager consider AI as an emerging risk? Would it be possible? So what would be a possible worst case scenario and how to approach it?
I think it's even worse than that, but I can start, and I'm sure everyone has an opinion. From a risk management perspective, you have, even if you look at third-party risk, when you look at the procurement side of things, you have software vendors today who you have procured and are using their systems, and they're turning on generative AI use cases within, overnight, and you might not have a good handle of that risk. So absolutely, these are an increased footprint of risk you have to consider. And when we talk about in any domain, and if you're doing this in if you are doing this in for example, financial services, what's the consequences of your employees all having access to these tools, even swivel chair access, right? And you have to consider that for the first time, these are not all AI tools that you have procured even, right? Like you used to either build these or buy them. Now they're freely available as well, and all of your employees can use them. So it is absolutely an increased footprint in terms of risk, and you have to take that into account when coming up with your responsible use policies for AI and how you deal with that increased risk.
Josh, any view? Should it be considered AI as an emerging risk?
Well, it depends a bit on the point of view, I would say. So indeed, it is a new risk and the tools are much more easily accessible. On the other hand, if we look at it as a, say, part of traditional model risk management, then it's something that has been already, at least in some sectors, in place for quite some time. And of course, in traditional model risk, there are, you have the inherent uncertainty of models, which is the same if you're using AI or not. You have other more operational types of risk related to potentially having mistakes in the implementation, or person risk related to the fact that not everyone is aware about what are the underlying assumptions of a particular model. This is still exactly the same when you deal with AI. Of course, as the use cases start to multiply, you might see suddenly certain business lines where analytics hasn't been used that frequently, and suddenly there is AI. And in that case, it would indeed be, I guess, an emerging risk. So yeah, it really depends on the point of view, I guess.
I think the other sort of dimension to consider as well is AI's impact on other risk categories like cybersecurity, for example. It's already been shown that you can use some AI models to create new malware, which could potentially give bad actors an easier access to this type of capability and the ability to also differentiate and change that attack vector quite quickly. as well as the compounding issue of the fact of using new software that utilizes the technology, sharing potentially private information with that technology, also being another potential item in the shop window that could be attacked by somebody as well. So generative AI could be its own risk factor, but it's also going to impact areas that we already look at today as well.
And we had a second polling questions about AI risk. The question was where does AI go from here? It gets more risky, or it gets less risky, or I don't know. And here we can see that basically half of the audience thinks that AI use will become more risky over time. So the question then is, what does this mean for insurance? What can reinsurance risk managers, what can reassure risk managers about using AI?
And I know Nick should answer this too, but
Exactly.
I think from our perspective, we're seeing the industry, and actually we're seeing the industry, and there's a few papers recently from Swiss Re that have come out. We're seeing them consider this as right now the next silent cyber. You know, is this covered or not, and to what degree under existing policies? What are the gaps? I know we're working closely with the insurance industry to cover some of those gaps. So it's definitely been heard that there are these gaps. You do need to cover them, and or they may or may not be covered. And of course, no one likes that situation, that lack of clarity. So so I know it's a very hot topic right now, and I know others will have comments too.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of work going on around silent AI as well. What I'm seeing from the technology point is a move towards having these systems work in broader and broader environments where they have more and more degrees of freedom available to them. And the compositions of these tools in chains operate in even greater environments. And there's a tendency from a technology point of view with the big companies like OpenAI and whatnot, trying to create tools that feel like they behave like humans do. And as users, whether we're end users or developers, we tend to implicitly assume that these tools will fail in similar ways to the way humans will fail. And this creates a lot of challenges because we have to ensure that when we build tools, that we're not getting coverage that assumes that these tools will fail in the way that they historically would have, where humans are making these decisions, or humans augmented with narrow technology.
And how do you see
Sorry.
the adoption of, sorry, James, you wanted to
Yeah, I just
comment,
wanted
please.
to maybe just provide maybe a bit of a positive side to it, I guess, because obviously it's a risk conversation, but when it comes to using AI models for making claims processes easier, interactions with insurance companies easier, it might be that some of those processes are a bit more straightforward and you get answers quicker and you get support quicker because some of those tools are more efficient and can really provide you with the support you need much more quickly. So yes, there is definitely obviously a risk angle to all of this, but it could also make some of those more day-to-day interactions much easier and much quicker for corporate risk managers as well.
And facilitates our work indeed. And how do you see basically the adoption of AI in Europe more generally? And maybe Dan, you can also compare. You know, you're based in Canada, so or from the rest of the world. How do you generally see the adoption of AI Europe compare maybe to the rest of the world?
We're definitely seeing, and I think James and others have alluded to this. There's two sides to this, right? There's on the one side, you know, these risks and the deployment of these solutions has increased risks to them, but there's a huge amount of benefits to this. There's a huge amount of potential efficiency gains, and it's a bit of an arms race. And we see you see your competitors deploying these solutions and feel like you have to follow suit. And so we're seeing that in different jurisdictions. I would say Europe is a little more measured right now. We saw a lot of deployments in the US. We're now seeing a lot of lawsuits in the US. So we're seeing it almost cycle, which is interesting. We're at that apex or curve where a lot of AI lawsuits are now turning into class action lawsuits, and that would include in the insurance industry. There are a few high-profile cases where, to James' point, even if ratings and pricing is well regulated, the use of claim systems, for example, with bias in them has a lot of potential. So a lot of the early adopters might have been too early, and we're seeing that full cycle in the US in particular. And I know, and Jos can maybe comment on this, we're seeing a lot of activity with groups refocusing on model management holistically. And so internally, when they're developing these solutions, particularly in regulated areas, but more broadly, we're seeing them focus back on their model validation teams, maybe redigging in, maybe adding to some of their processes or tweaking, but it's not a throw your baby out with the bathwater. It's building on what you have, and model validation teams taking up a lot of the slack there. I don't know, Jos, if you're seeing that too.
Yes, exactly. We definitely see that. There is a lot of attention these days in existing model risk management teams to start to incorporate all these new AI use cases. And even though it might not necessarily be driven by regulation, it's just a matter of trying to understand the risks that are being that are being taken and the risks that are associated to those new AI use cases itself. So in that case, the very natural starting point is to make sure that, say, the existing risk management framework gets updated so that it deals with the specificities of AI. And we discussed that already a little bit beforehand. And then once that's in place, obviously, it's about making sure that these models are independently reviewed or validated so that they can be, that there is a certain quality assurance before the use cases are being published. And that's a very natural way of, say, expanding the existing processes to also incorporate those new types of model types, such as AR or generative AI use cases.
James or Nick, any trends that you have seen?
Yeah, I guess from our perspective, we saw at the start of 2023 that sort of customer engagements around the topic of generative AI went through the roof. We were having multiple meetings a week. It seemed that every insurer was dipping their toe in the water. And it definitely feels that sort of past that sort of peak, conversations or the frequency of conversations maybe slowed down a little bit past that point. I think we saw some insurers sort of jumping into this and building out data science teams, building out infrastructure around it, licensing models sort of internally in sort of a ring-fenced environment, trying to socialize the use of AI tools internally to get everybody using that sort of technology. And I from my perspective, I feel that that sort of momentum slowed down a little bit. That some of those conversations are obviously going on, but in terms of the volume of businesses that we were speaking to about this, it's probably a little bit lower than it was at the start of last year, as everybody's sort of more understanding of the topic and sort of maybe the direction they're going in. I think everybody was quite eager to understand what's my neighbor doing, and what's the town doing, and what are you doing, and finding all of this stuff out at the start of last year. And I think this year the pitch is a little bit different.
And I'd like to come back to a point that you mentioned, James, earlier on about the link with cyber risk. So will AI change the cyber risk?
It's a good question. I guess from my perspective, it kind of has to, right? I think one of the exciting things about where we are in our journey with AI is that the future can kind of be a million different options around how quickly the technology evolves, how quickly adoption evolves, etc. And I think all of that is going to impact its potential impact on cybersecurity. But I think any time that we're introducing new technologies, new capabilities into an organization, that's always going to potentially provide weak spots or opportunities for potential attack vectors or mismanagement of data. So I think it makes logical sense from my perspective that it is going to have an impact on cybersecurity. But how it evolves, I think, is again exciting because it could go in a million different directions, and it's only something that we're going to find out as time progresses and as these models improve and as adoption increases across organizations.
Yes, I might want to add maybe as well that indeed, first of all, the attack surface becomes bigger, obviously. So yes, new AI comes with more cyber risk, but on the other hand, there's also plenty of AI use cases in cyber risk management itself, right? Like for instance, smart web application filters or detection of intrusion. All of this, we use AI algorithms more and more rather than traditional rule-based systems. So what's interesting there is if we think about managing AI risk, we also have to look in those use cases and take those into account, add them in the inventory of our AI use cases and manage them like we manage all the other AI risk cases.
If we now look at the results of the third poll that we launched, so the question was, which area of risk management do you see as being most assisted by AI? And there were several possibilities as answer: risk mapping, risk assessment, risk quantification, replacing risk managers, insurance management. And we see that basically 44% think that risk quantification will benefit more from AI. Then it's for 13% risk mapping and risk assessment as well. And for 31% is insurance management. Nobody answered that it would replace risk managers. So basically, the two main areas are quantification and insurance. Nick, how do you react to that?
Well, I think I agree that we're not likely to see any professions wholesale replaced in the near future. And to kind of harken back to what James was saying, I think there's a technology adoption curve that we've seen, especially with machine learning, several times in the past decade, where at first it seems like everything is possible and then all sorts of the day-to-day work, the challenges we experience are going to be automated. But when you really start digging into it and you start finding out what is actually involved in the entire end-to-end process, it turns out that the automatable bit, the stuff that we actually think will be most easy to offload to a computer, actually comprises a fairly small proportion of the overall work that needs to be done. And I think that that's going to remain true even going into this new kind of generative AI-fueled world. The biggest, I think, area of opportunity is simply managing this enormously heterogeneous set of data that we're constantly exposed to, whether that's in the horizon mapping or in like processing of insurance claims or whatever it happens to be. But the exact form that that's going to take is not quite clear yet.
I'll just add, I'm not. That's a really cool poll, and I'm not surprised by the results. I think risk quantification will be enhanced greatly, as well as risk identification, and that might be considered a subset of that. But there are a lot of these needle in the haystack problems. We know we don't catch all of the needles in the haystack, and this is a great opportunity to layer on this technology in a thoughtful way to detect, some of these anomalies or to detect some of these issues that might blow up later on. So I think it's a great time to be a risk manager. This is a great new field that is growing with huge benefits that enterprises need to enter and need proper thoughtful risk management. So I don't see the replacement of risk managers. I see the job becoming more critical. So it's a fun time.
Obviously, being part of Moody's, I'm always going to sort of go down the angle of risk assessment, being a really big benefiter of any sort of AI tools. I mean, we've been looking at how we can use unstructured news sources, things like court docs, annual reports, etc., to try and find signals in the noise to help our clients evaluate risk. Historically, this data was difficult for people to have the time to read through. Everybody's going to maybe interpret the information differently. So using AI tools to really to identify and then also potentially quantify the risk within that sort of type of unstructured data has been seen as a potentially really big use case of some of this technology on our side. So yeah, from my perspective, obviously being part of Moody's, I'm always going to likely to think that the risk assessment angle, the risk identification angle is going to be a really exciting area that this type of technology could be used for.
Yes, and linking to risk assessment, we haven't spoken about the fake news. So what about fake news in terms of risk assessment for the companies?
Yeah, fake news is always a difficult topic to identify. I think I've seen stories online of it's a little bit different, but stories online of people's essays at universities being identified for being highly generative AI based assessments, and they sort of are very definitive in the fact that they indeed aren't. So trying to spot articles which have been created using this sort of technology, I think is quite difficult. Trying to spot that sort of either metadata or sort of indicators within how this text is being written to identify this type of article. But yeah, it's definitely been a hot word for a couple of years now. And anything that we can do to use this technology to identify that sort of stuff is going to be beneficial in terms of filtering out a lot of the noise for people.
Yes, exactly. And I would say that so far, perhaps you have seen other examples, but so far I've not been very impressed by the performance of all the fake news detection algorithms, or like all the algorithms or the classification algorithms that have been produced. Even the ones that was produced by OpenAI has been retracted, I believe, because it was not even able to recognize OpenAI generated text. So I think it's going to be more about learning to work with information. I mean, learning to question the information that you get and not just simply accept it. A real concern I have, however, is if so far there is hopefully still quite a bit of real data out there, but if everything gets flooded by, say, synthetically generated data, then it's going to be hard. We've seen something similar in, say, algo trading, for instance, in the financial markets, FX trading. I think for every customer flow that happens in the market, there might be 10 times as much generated flows by algo trades. And it feels a bit like data, and gathering data is going to play the same role, that the actual humanly generated data that is, say, the gold for all this training is going to be very hard to find.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just to build on that point, I think one of the reasons why Moody's has engaged quite heavily within the AI space in the last year and sort of have that strategic partnership with Microsoft is because we feel, and the clients we've spoken to and Microsoft feel, that a large part of using these models is going to be basing the output on trustworthy data that provides that grounding to the response. And we feel that, data providers that have that sort of integrity, that trustworthy nature to the content they're providing, can really be used to enhance some of the outputs that people are receiving from these models. So you can be more confident in the grounding of that answer, and it's not necessarily trusting that this large language model can access the right data to provide the response you're looking for. It's using the capability of that LLM in the context of that specific data that you're looking at that is related to the topic that you're using that LLM for.
Well, thank you very much. A last word, maybe Dan, you wanted?
Oh, sorry. I would just say that
Yes.
that fake news, hallucinations, right? This all right now, I think, requires a training of employees as well, and that's an important aspect of this. It's how you use the technology and how you recognize some of these risks. And like any good risk management process or program, often the weak spot is your employees or the people side of it, and that would extend to, as it extends to security, right? So training will be an important part of AI risk management.
Thank you very much. We are now coming to an end, and you can see the result of the last poll we did. And the question was, what does the audience believe to be the biggest challenge in the use of AI going forward? And you can see that the regulatory environment, the compliance aspect, as well as talent, recruiting talent or keeping talent are the main challenges. So we don't have much time, so I won't ask you to react on this last poll, but I would like to leave you with, a quote from Kai Zenne, who said in the interview, risk managers are the perfect actors to guide companies through periods of uncertainty. So, well, there's a lot to do. And I'd like to thank our speakers very much for your insights, your time. It's clear that AI has a big influence on risk management. And this is why at FERMA, we're going to use the content which has been shared during this webinar series to produce a white paper on AI, which will be released at the FERMA Forum in October in Madrid. So if you have not registered yet to the forum, I really invite you to do so. And the entry is free for risk managers. Thank you again very much to our 4 experts for their insightful contributions. We appreciate everyone's participation and we look forward to continue the conversation. So I invite you to stay connected through future webinars and all the resources that you can find on FERMA website. Thank you.